Welcome to Politikali Konekted, a podcast on everything politics and governance in Kenya and Africa. We unpack the complexities of people, policy, and power. I'm your host, Diana Ngao,
aka Madam Speaker, and I am Chaka,
aka the Bishop.
In this episode, can you smell what Sugoi is cooking? Things are getting hot in the kitchen.
And things are getting worse.
And we're just getting started.
Imagine.
Siasa mbaya.
Maisha mbaya.
It's quite hot in the kitchen and temperatures are creasing.
Yeah, they are creasing and they are reaching the temperature where now a human should not enter.
Na ni mwanzo bado. The Hansard record of the National Assembly is, I think, itapasuka mbarika.
I know.
Because of some of the things that are being discussed, they are too heavy.
They are very heavy. Very heavy.
I heard things being said, Mara, a dark man with a dark heart. Mara, Mr. Speaker, you know, there was an attempt
on the president. Yeah, and also saying that there are people saying that the flag will fly half-mast.
Mnusu mlingoti. Where do we even begin? Where do you start cutting up this elephant? It's so... The impeachment of the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. We are in a season where truth is stranger than fiction. Anything we could have anticipated, clearly, our imaginations were not broad enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are living in a season of the unprecedented, the unexpected, and the discombobulating.
Hey, ameongea kama Babu Owino.
Interestingly, now that you mentioned Babu Owino, he's oddly quiet at a very tense political moment, and he did not vote.
And was he in parliament?
I'm not sure.
I didn't see him. I watched the impeachment motion, and I don't believe seeing him but anyway.
I don't think I also saw Ndindi Nyoro.
Huh?
I can't even remember the last time I heard from him.
That's true. He's quite silent.
So,
very interesting time.
Yeah, the key players or the people you think are the key players are not even stage left
or stage
about
right
to enter. But we're living in a very key historic moment. And there's so much to unpack. And I think this will require more than one episode because it is just the beginning.
Definitely, because this is the first time since the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution, a deputy president is being impeached. We've seen governors being impeached.
Yes.
We've seen ministers being impeached.
Yes.
But we've never seen, even at the height of Uhuru and Ruto's a strange relationship, we never had rumors of impeachment. We only had calls of Basisiu resign. We never had.
And even other than being the first time under the 2010 Constitution, it's only ever happened one other time in history with Vice President Josephat Karanja.
Yeah.
But even that was not an impeachment because it wasn't... there was no provision for that per se
in the Constitution.
In the Constitution with respect to the Vice President. So it was a vote of no confidence. But he resigned. And one can't help but wonder, they say, some people say history repeats itself, some people say that history rhymes.
Yeah.
So, will history rhyme?
Chaka, that is my biggest problem with this impeachment, is the precedents that it will set. I start thinking of this 10, 20 years from now, that I mean, this is William Ruto's first term. It's only year 2.
We're not even halfway. Kabisa.
Kabisa, and we're at the point of impeaching a deputy president. I'm going to talk about the before even I get to the grounds of impeachment, I just start thinking of the president because, we keep saying that William Ruto is the student index 001 of Mzee Moi.
Yes.
And Moi, out of all the presidents we had, seemed to have not one, not two, not three vice presidents in his tenure, right? So I wonder that this is setting a precedence and a bad precedence because just like Moi says, and we said earlier, siasa mbaya.
Maisha mbaya. But also, we mentioned key players who've been silent. Have not had a peep from the president.
I would beg to differ. When you read the impeachment motion, it reads William Ruto. So we may have not had him, like the way the deputy president has been going around and talking, and how MPs have been calling for his impeachment. We may not have had him, but we have had his key lieutenants talking about the deputy president's behavior and why they want to impeach him. But also when you read the impeachment motion, it sounds like something William Ruto would say but cannot, on good grounds as to why he cannot speak about his deputy. Yeah.
Let me play devil's advocate. The man famously known as the Grand Mullah, Senior Counsel Ahmed Nasir Abdullahi, sent out a tweet, and I think it was genuine. These days you can't be too sure. That stated that the president was not consulted, and he's upset that such a thing proceeded without anybody thinking to ask him what his 2 cents were.
Nakwambia, let me tell you something.
Chaka. Is it his 2 cents or his 8 billion? Oh,
cents.
Anyway,
because he ain't no broke man. But listen, there is no way the president was not aware the MPs were wanted to impeach. Because we already knew before the impeachment motion came up that MPs were going to impeach.
But he wasn't in Kenya.
Okay. Hata wenye wako diaspora wanajua about deputy president's impeachment. This is my take on this. They are now retracting. They are noticing the public uproar, and there are very many other things. Remember, currently as we are here in Kenya, currently as we speak, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 crises happening at the same time. There's so much going on. So I'm sure, seated as president, you don't want to light another fire.
Too late.
But it's lit.
Yeah.
I think when they had planned, I honestly think, this is my honestly think. I know sometimes you think that the Kenya Kwanza regime is so brilliant with political maneuvers. I honestly think that at this rate, they are just wanna guess to tufanye hivi. Then they realize that tungefanya hivi, tungeanza na hii. And that's where we're at now. Because we've seen that. By the way, we've seen such a play come up before when the president, just in his early tenure on his rule, when he did I'm trying to remember, was it the appointment of judges or appointment of someone? Then he had to quickly retract and now go according to how the constitution, the stipulations of how that appointment goes. So I honestly think Grand Mullah's tweet, before even he said that the president was not aware, last week he tweeted and said, and I quote, he wrote, outgoing deputy president. Mimi, I thought that is the wildest thing.
Yes.
Because how can you assume, or rather not assume, but boldly tweet that the deputy president is outgoing? That time, the impeachment motion had not yet been tabled in parliament. It was just public talk here and there. So, and then now you're saying that he tweeted the president was not aware. Nakwambia, tunapeanga stories za jaba. Now it's for you to decide what is your diet. Kama unapenda jaba, utakula jaba. Na utasikiza hizo stories za jaba. But
whatever you choose to eat, make sure it doesn't cause constipation. And because there is so much on the table right now.
Yeah.
And to speak to what you've said about, you've alluded to a guessing game. I would say to that there's a measure of brilliance. There is a measure of brilliance, but I think that brilliance is tactical brilliance. It is brilliance in terms of tactics, but what the strategy is, we cannot speak to its brilliance or lack thereof, because I think that can only be analyzed retrospectively. And that's precisely because there are so many things at play and things keep being thrown onto the table. And part of why I say that is reading the impeachment motion. I find it interesting that, earlier we discussed the impeachment of CS Politikali.
Yeah.
And that one, the main issue was fertilizer.
The fake fertilizer.
But with this one, for the deputy president, it's not just one thing. There are 10 grounds.
Yeah, of impeachment.
And these 10 grounds, as I read that impeachment motion, it is clear to me that in the last 2 years, this case was being built over time, because from the beginning, one of the first motions on divisiveness and inciting,
They
talk about things that he was saying just when they had come into power.
Shareholders.
They then talk about things that happened in the first year, which somehow were not conclusively dealt with, and we wondered why. For example, the mosquito nets, right? The KEMSA ones.
Mosquito gate.
Yeah, and there wasn't any serious action surrounding that. Okay, I think a few people were moved here and there, but now it features in this impeachment motion. So in my reading, someone had taken the time to build this case. I'll give you another example, and I say this with a measure of hesitation. There was that famous, another unprecedented moment where the deputy president was at loggerheads with the National Intelligence Service. The National Intelligence Service did not respond for the record, as far as I understand. But again, given the gravity of that, you don't see anything substantial happening. But now it features in this impeachment motion. So that's why, whether I would say it's guessing, I can think there has been a deliberate attempt. Who has been coordinating it? It could be somebody who was working on this and then came and presented it and said, Cheki, even dokumekua.
So are you saying that since they got into power, someone somewhere, or even whoever, the chef, let's call the chef started cooking and already started making like some meals to ensure that at some point in this journey of 5 years, we are going to remove this guy.
Yeah. You know, some of the best meals, they say, are the ones that take the longest to cook. Okay, it's been 2 years, so it's a short while. But in terms of recent political history, this has been marinating for some time. But when it started cooking, now, let me also add that somebody smelt it.
And decided to run with it.
Not just decided to run with it. The person who thought he had a seat on the table, smelled something was cooking, and he realized his clothes had caught fire. And he realized that actually, whereas he thought he had a seat on the table, he was on the menu. That's why he started telling us he's listening to the ground. But really, he was using his nose. He had smelled something was cooking.
I'm just wondering, but that just makes a play for bad politics.
It's
completely...
What you've said about what may have likely have happened in an alternate history where Raila was president, I think alternate histories are tricky things because they require a lot of assumptions to hold. But the thing about history is that it can be very instructive in a way that alternate histories cannot be, because there are a lot of what ifs on this side. But history tells us that seat of the deputy president, not just in Kenya, around the world, has been a seat of, contention, controversy. I don't know whether it's something about being too close to power.
I think it's succession.
Yes.
It really is succession. Because
and that succession maybe then makes the person at the top or the people around the person at the top feel there's going to be some finality to this thing they want to enjoy.
Yeah.
Having said that, so you see in our Kenyan history that every single vice president and deputy president has been embattled, whether at fault or not at fault, starting with
our very first vice president in this country.
And sure enough, what did he do?
He resigned.
And then you see President Moi, then Vice President Moi. He was also quite embattled, and it played a key part in his political formation. In fact, he was so embattled that the same things that the current deputy president is complaining about people who are several ranks below as subordinates giving him instructions. What that was also happening to Vice President Daniel Moi, where he was being undermined by people who were not his peers politically. Yeah. So much so that we often say that Moi could appoint or dismiss vice presidents, but something critical happened while Jomo was still president. There was that push to change the constitution. So you can see the law and the constitution being used as an instrument for political play.
As you were given that brief history, it just hit me that there are two things at play here that is used as a political instrument. I mean, a political tool. There's a constitution that sometimes is manipulated to fit a certain political maneuver, but there's also something that has plagued us since Nini, and that is tribalism. Because the only reason this change the constitution movement happened during Jomo Kenyatta's reign is because a section of Gema MPs were like, we can't have Daniel Arap Moi succeed. So it seems that the deputy president, or back then it was a vice president seat, most of the issues come in because of succession. And then someone starts thinking it's succession based on what? Tribal lines. So how can we maneuver this? Because it seems if a president was to pass on, like the way Jomo Kenyatta passed on in power, it's the deputy president that takes on. And someone somewhere is like, we gotta maneuver through this. And when you look even through Moi came in, and I read Linjiro's book. Did you read it?
No.
The president's pressman. And he gave me some really good insight from Moi, because in our history books, when we were learning, we don't get to understand the persona of who President Moi was. And I loved that book because Linjiro really just opened the door to kind of understand who President Moi, his persona. And in his book, he seemed to, when he assumed power as president, really had a goodwill and the heart of Kenya. I wanted to do something. He was young. Was he young? He was young-ish. But it seemed like from the book, he seemed like, he was going to start in a good nini. And even though there was a change, the constitution movement, and there were some people from Gema, which now we call Murima, against him assuming the presidency, he appointed a deputy president from Murima, Gema, which was Mwai Kibaki. And Mwai Kibaki ended up serving all until 1988. Was it 1988 or 1981?
88.
88. Yeah. And I mean, the relationship, coming from that is now that's when we see Moi changing. After Kibaki is when we see Moi changing his vice presidents. But I'm just realizing that a lot of some of the issues, as you say, that it has been in part of our history where deputy presidents or vice presidents are embattled. But there seems to be a joining thread, which is tribal or regional politics and succession.
We started this episode by asking where some key players are, some of them at least. And what's also interesting, now going back to that when Kenya was still not yet, barely a teenager. One of the things you see is, other than the constitution and the law being used as a tool for political play, we also see that there were major key players who influenced history other than the president and the vice president. Because we know that now they were not able to change the constitution quickly enough, because Jomo Kenyatta arrested. And then there's this helter-skelter that is happening. And the person we learned from history who was instrumental in ensuring that he did ascend to power is the Duke of Kabetashire.
Mr. Charles Njonjo.
Yes. So at key moments in history, you see very powerful people, although Charles Njonjo later,
who was fired by the same person he helped get to the presidency.
He was accused of colluding with his friends in the West, and he was about to usurp the presidency. And remember, at this point in time, I think the attempted coup has already happened.
So Moi was very
wary. If I'm not wrong, it had the attempt had already happened. So even now, even as we reference the president and the deputy president, we then also ask, who are some of the key players? Are there hidden hands in this? Are there certain people who make key choices that will turn the tide of history? So those are things also, I think, to watch out for. Because, for instance, I'll give an example. Governor Mutula Kilonzo Jr. asked a question after the motion was tabled. And he said, where are all the noisemakers from Kiambu or Central? Why was it being done by a legislator from Ukambani? And it is a key question, because one of the key moments we see leading up to this was more than 40 members of parliament from the mountain gathering and telling us Rigathi must go. And that's a reference to Boni Khalwale during Kimunya must go. So now these MPs tell us Rigathi must go. And it's not too long after that we see this motion being tabled. So
why is it being tabled? By
somebody who we hadn't seen being at the forefront. So, and the point here is that there's quite a lot that is deliberate, in terms of tact. Even some of the questions that were asked on the floor of the House and some of the points that were made, I think they were also deliberate.
I actually thought that the motion would be tabled by the majority leader, Kimani Ichung'wah, because there seemed to be a public spat between him and the deputy president. The deputy president in public forums sometimes would mention him, and he would also in public forums also talk about the deputy president's behavior or something else. So I honestly thought that if it was not anyone, it would be someone, of course, from the if it's not part of the 40 MPs that said that Rigathi must go, if it was not any of them, then it would be the majority leader.
But it was none of them. None of the above.
It was quite surprising. But let me tell you another key moment for me as I was watching the motion, is that as the MP was tabling the motion, is it Kibwezi West? I think so. And so the camera he's reading the motion so
passionately.
Yeah, enthusiastically, and these are the names, I'm going to give you the names of the people who signed this motion. And you see the front row behind him, you see Kimani Ichung'wah and someone else and another lady, and they were just giggling through the whole motion. And I was wondering, the gravity of what is being tabled in Parliament, to whisper and giggle about it was such a key moment. I was so perplexed. I'm like, kwani ini joke? At some point, I even started thinking that this is a sideshow. Because also in Parliament, there are some very key things that have been tabled, not just in the National Assembly, but also at the Senate. There's a change the Constitution, or let me call it, I was about to say change the Constitution movement. Let me call it as it is. There's the Constitutional Amendment Bill that seeks to extend the tenure of the president down to the MCAs, most of the elective leaders, to 7 years, adding an extra 2 years. Then there's also the horticultural bill that is in the National Assembly that seeks, is it horticultural or the agriculture?
There's more than one.
There's the nuts and there's pyrethrum. But basically all these bills that touch on the agricultural sector are trying to police how people farm.
Shift is still at play.
And
meanwhile, Adani is still at play.
By the way, Chaka, hii tabling of impeachment
kipindire
ilikuwa kipindire, because why did it happen the same day Sha or Shif, whatever it is, was being rolled out?
I think that's why I'm saying I'd hesitate to say that it's guesswork, because I'll give you another angle to consider. One of the people who stood up to speak and present a point of information to Speaker Wetangula, which I did not expect, was Minority Leader now, Junet Mohammed. And it got me thinking, what if this had been tabled just before the Come We Stay arrangement? So was that timing also deliberate? Because you have the threshold being surpassed significantly.
291 signatures.
It's a unanimous chorus.
Even much. On Twitter, I even tweeted, I'm like, ODM yote. I was so shocked. Okay, it wasn't all of ODM, but at that time when I was hearing key members of ODM who have signed the impeachment, and I was like, Allah. And it got me questioning, it's true, if they had tabled this motion prior to the Come We Stay marriage,
might not have seen the light of day. So I do believe there's quite a lot at play, and much that we will need to analyze, because as you rightly mentioned, another aspect of that constitutional amendment bill is not only does it seek to extend the term of elected leaders to be a 7-year term. It's not clear its effect on term limits, by the way, but it also seeks to introduce what had been tabled. It also seeks to inject a BBI proposal with respect to the Prime Minister. It now proposes that the Prime Minister, as was in BBI, the Prime Minister will be appointed from the National Assembly.
Oh.
Yes, from the leader of the single biggest party or coalition in Parliament, in the National Assembly. So, if that passes, you don't have now this prime CS, the first among equals. You have a situation where the prime minister will be an MP. And I don't see Davadi running to be an MP.
Well, I get why you're saying that it may not all be guesswork, but I do not think they began this year in January saying that in the midst of this year, before 2024 finishes, that we will impeach the deputy president. And that's why I'm saying they may have some sort of idea of what they want to achieve. But then when they do this and then they see some public uproar, they're like, man, we shouldn't have started with this. So they may have a menu of political maneuvers, right? But in terms of sometimes the timing is right, which is true. And I could call it even a stroke of luck. Because also this Can We Stay marriage, they hadn't planned it. Or rather, they had planned it differently until the Gen Z protests came and gave them an opportunity. And they saw, actually, this is where now we call our mistress to become the main person in the house.
That's true, and it's because in the field of political players in battle, you can't anticipate every move of your opponent or the environment in which you're waging battle, and so you have to adapt. But nonetheless, the intention to bludgeon your opponent is definitely there from the moment you get into the ring. And I say that because just picking up from what we're just saying about the amendment bill, it's not something fresh, because notice that this was something that was mentioned or discussed not once or twice as soon as
they joined,
as soon as they entered power,
yeah.
By the same, and even
the
if
same
we were to
senator,
say that now the UDA is saying that they are not in support of it, they would have reined him in a long time ago, I think, because that's why you have even party whips. There's a story in the Bible about Mordecai, who set a plan in motion, and it was meant to injure somebody else. But in the end, the king ended up using that same plan against him. And the moral of that story usually is, if you dig a hole, don't dig it too deep, because you might be the one who ends up inside of it. What's the point here? The point is, some of these things that are happening, as you said, are setting a precedent. Yeah.
I actually also, based on what you're saying, I'm now starting to see as kind of silver lining in this impeachment motion, which I have here and I've gone through, is that it also, all the 10 grounds that they are saying is gross violation of the Constitution and grounds for impeachment, is almost like a mirror that can be reflected back to almost all elected and appointed politicians, from the executive down to the county assemblies, because they are saying, number one, he's creating ethnic tension and division that is against the national cohesion in the Constitution. They're saying that he has amassed too much wealth
inexplicably.
In the last 2 years. And I actually think for us Kenyans, this document gives us a blueprint on how we can hold our current leaders accountable. Down to actually the main man in question, who will be left without a deputy president if this impeachment goes through or this process goes through. What they have done, or the MPs that want to impeach the deputy president, what they have done is also given us some nice, let me call them silver bullets.
It's interesting you say that, because indeed, the Constitution being still very new in a sense, there's a lot of jurisprudence that needs to be developed around it.
Yeah.
And that is part of what we are seeing. But also, what this season of politics is teaching us, not just the current moment, but going back a few years, is that as Kenyans, we really need to pay mind to what is going on in our politics, the implications of certain choices, the implications of some of the things that we chose to include in the constitution, the implications of choosing or electing certain leaders, because oftentimes things have been taken too lightly and talked about in a hollow way. You talk about certain ideals, but never really put a foundation under them. So words are often used quite loosely. But now we are coming into a season, and there may be a temptation to just castigate the elected leaders and the people at the top. But I think this is a national conversation, and part of the reason I say that is, one, these accountability issues, even if they're coming through the way of being used as a political tool, are the accountability issues that the Gen Z were talking about, as you mentioned earlier. Yes, we're seeing the impeachment of the deputy president playing out, but there are other things that are happening in the country. There was a Gen Z protest. They talked about accountability. We are seeing it at play here, even though it's coming in as a being used as a political tool. There are conversations that are underway, and this, fortunately or unfortunately, how it's being done is questionable, but it will advance the conversation, because remember, they have tabled the motion. There's going to have to be a response. The implication of that is that our constitution and our institutions are being stress tested. And on top of that, that's happening at the national level. We are also seeing
things happening on the county levels. Yes.
So we started, when the new constitution came in, there was an attempt at an impeachment here. There was another attempt there. You see a few successful ones. Sonko is out. Waitito is out. Mwangaza has now been impeached after several efforts. Wambora was a cat that had 9 lives.
But Nyamira governor as well.
There seems to be an acceleration now.
I think, I agree with what you're saying, that I think that where we've gotten in the season of politics is that all the things, they say the constitution is a living document.
Yes.
But all the things that were written in that constitution are coming to life. They never, like for the Gen Z protests, when we wrote that, when the drafters of the constitution wrote that the people shall,
we the people.
Yeah, we the people shall execute their sovereignty either directly or indirectly through elected leaders. No one ever envisioned what that looked like. I'm sure even as we never envisioned what that looked like. And even now, with the clause, Article 150 of the Constitution of removal of a deputy president, it was there in the Constitution, but no one ever actually saw it coming to life. So in this period, and it's just in the last 2 years, actually it's been in the last few months, or rather 2024, this season of politics, a lot of the things that we have written and agreed on the constitution are being like,
Yes.
People have invoked their sovereignty directly, and then what? Now maybe let me get to this point where now we have activated Article 150 of the Constitution, which is the removal of the deputy president. And then what's next?
There's a recent episode, one of our first episodes, where I shared a story. We're talking about the promulgation of the Constitution and how I was in the crowd and it was a key moment. And I then shared that later, I was in uni at the time, later when I discussed it with my professor of jurisprudence, he asked me a key question, and he asked, will the courts enforce it? Very well and good, you have a new constitution. Will the courts enforce it? The reason I bring this point is, as you're saying, every provision, every line in the constitution, the same way Jesus says that not a single iota of his word will be subject. Every comma, in the constitution. I remember Professor Githu Muigai on the floor of the National Assembly one time, and he was quoting a provision, and not only did he quote the words, he was like, comma, So everything in this constitution is important. And the next field of battle for the path we take with this living document will largely also depend on the courts. And the precedents that have been set with the governors are instructive, but the threshold is now being raised. Key questions are at the national stage, and they will be answered in many ways in our law courts, and how we respond also to those decisions. Yes.
So maybe tell us, like, on the constitution, okay, this impeachment has been tabled. What next?
That's a very good question. Now, what we are seeing next is you had Speaker Wetangula saying that House business would be suspended on that Thursday, and now we've seen public participation happening on Friday. So
is there a timeline for the public participation?
It's going to happen on one day in all 47 counties. Yes.
Why?
Again, very good. Now, those are some of the discussions we need to be having. So are we doing it to tick a box, or is it actually a process that allows people in other words, are our voices being heard in all this? It was our voices that got this man or these people into power.
Elected, yeah.
Are our voices being heard as they're being removed?
I honestly think that there needs to be a better criteria for public participation. And I think you said this in the previous episode, where public participation is not a privilege. It is a right.
It is a right. And it's one of the Achilles heels of our constitution, because so many plans, policies, agendas of government have been halted by public participation, not being sufficient. And it's a good thing that the courts have really taken it seriously. Yeah. So now, based on the precedents which are there from the impeachment of the governors, the current threshold is not very high. But it's not very high because in the Waititu case, during his impeachment, they said one of the issues they raised was that there wasn't sufficient public participation. He even said he didn't see the signatures of the people who had voted to impeach him. But the response was, there were, in terms of public participation, there were memoranda and questionnaires to the county, and they were deemed sufficient. So the nature of public participation currently is, the question is, have people been given an opportunity? And it doesn't go much further than that. So why I'm saying or asking this one day, is it just to tick a box? How it plays out in the courts, and remember an application was filed, 4 or 5 of them actually, at the beginning, as soon as the motion was being tabled. And one of the questions they raised was public participation. So the question is, will the courts restrict themselves to the current precedents, or will they raise the threshold? The current precedents may have been sufficient for county governments because they're still a creature we're trying to figure out. But now at a national level, the quality of questions, the quality of the issues really require a different level of depth.
That's true. And I'm just wondering how public participation nationally can be done in one day. In one day. Like if it seems that this is a train that they want to speed up and not move at the current.
To be fair, and that also the timelines for how things need to play out are also quite tight, and it's something we also saw during presidential petitions. The time that had been allocated constitutionally in the law to how fast things should be filed, how much time there is for pleadings and responses, and for the justices of the Supreme Court to then analyze and make a determination was quite short. And so, yes, on the one hand, we may say that one day is not sufficient. Why are they only allocating one day? But we also need to look at what has been availed to them in the law. So after that happens, when the impeachment, so the National Assembly is not a trial chamber, like the Speaker said. It then goes to the Senate, and then the Senate will either prosecute it in plenary with the whole House, or an 11-member committee will be set up. And their first task is to substantiate the grounds. What is he being accused of?
Oh, that now happens at Senate, not
that
at
happens at
national.
Senate. Yeah.
So if the deputy president was to appear to defend himself, is it at the National Assembly or is it
both.
At Senate?
He has a right. He has a right to be heard. In fact, he will be allocated 2 hours sometime next week in the National Assembly. And it's going to be very interesting because whether he does it himself or through legal representation, or whether he doesn't do it at all, if he does, seeing him defending himself in a room where 300 people who are not singing Kumbaya are listening to you and want you out is going to be very interesting. Another key moment in our history, depending on how it plays out.
And also, I'm just thinking about, he was their second in command.
Yes.
And now you have to defend yourself in front of your...
History is replete with, such examples.
Yeah.
So then when it goes to... So National Assembly, you can think about it like... a combination of the office of the director of public prosecutions. They put the case together and then bring it to court. So the Senate is which then tries the issues and begins by asking, are these issues triable? Is there a case to answer? And then proceeds on those grounds. Now now it may not necessarily also just end with him being impeached. There's a question of what the court may have to say, because in the past we've seen the court overturning an impeachment. So the courts will be very crucial in this, but it's very delicate because, again, there's a balance here with the separation of powers, which is something that has also been mooted in the grounds that the deputy president acted beyond his powers with respect to the county and the judiciary, county of Nairobi and the judiciary. So the court will have a tight walking rope to walk. But if he is impeached, and if the courts don't stop it, or if it eventually goes through, we now have a situation where we don't have a deputy president.
Yeah.
And the deputy president is not being replaced overnight.
What happens?
You have, as soon as a vacancy arises, the Constitution says that the president has 14 days to nominate.
To nominate.
But after he nominates, again, it's not 14 days that after these 14 days that we get a brand new...
it has to go through Parliament again.
It has to go through Parliament for 60 days for the MPs to vote on it. Now, two things.
Is it vote or vet?
But they'll have to vote on it eventually, because it's both... because they'll debate it. So it's both qualitative and quantitative.
Okay.
But having said that, there's no guarantee that that nominee will be accepted in the first round.
And there are people who have already been positioning others or positioning themselves.
Yes, we've had certain names being said.
Yeah.
But the question I keep asking is, where is it written that these people we are assuming are the
Next in line,
who has committed to this that we know of? You hear it's being discussed, yes, and it's being assumed. Anyway, or let me ask this: who is to say, to make it a little less controversial, who is to say that Parliament will accept that name? And historically, though not under the new constitution, we've had 2 instances of long periods without
a vice president.
Yes. You had the stint of George Saitoti being interrupted, and we were without a vice president for a year
Almost
and
a year.
half. Yeah. And
that was 1998 to 1999.
Yeah, to mid 1999. So it's going to be interesting to see another first in our country where that is going to be stress test and how it's going to be handled. While all this is happening, remember, there is a question before the courts on the dissolution of parliament. While all this is happening,
we need IBC commissioners.
Yeah, there's so much at play that we need to observe in the coming days. And
mambo ni mengi, masaa ni machache.
Yeah, everything is everywhere.
So I guess we can't really come to the conclusion of this episode because so many things are at play.
We're just getting ini season 1.
Ini season 1 ya hii episode ya impeachment.
Na bado kuna ma plot twist kibao.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what would be your parting shot from just what you've seen since the Tuesday motion being tabled? What is your first comment? Let me say, because I want to say your final word, but it can't be a final word.
Now, I think my parting shot is this: that part of what we aim to do at Politically Connected, as we often say, is to raise the civic consciousness of the continent and of the country. And I think for me, I'd want to avoid the temptation that is often there of focusing just on the politicians and what they're doing and what they're saying. For me, my focus is how are the people going to digest this? What choice, how will it inform their choices going forward? Are they following closely? Because at the end of the day, Kenya ni home. And we will have to live with the consequences of how this plays out.
Yeah.
We are the ones who will have to bear the brunt of it, whichever way it plays out.
Absolutely.
And this is a monumental... Kenya will never be the same.
Again.
Yeah, but we have a say in
the trajectory in which we should go, the path in which we should take. Whether there are very many options. And
very well said.
Yeah, there are very many options. That's true. I guess for me, it would be in the Kenya that we're living in and with the kind of regime we have in power, we cannot even we don't have time to sleep. Because if it costs us, I just keep on thinking, I'm like, when you go to certain developed countries and you see how system works for the common citizens, and I keep asking, what would it take for Kenya to get there? It's very many things that it would take for Kenya to get there, but one of the most foundational things that doesn't cost us anything is vigilance. Paying attention to what needs to be paid attention, asking the right questions. So for me, I am asking, this document on impeachment, is it necessary now? Number one. because we've had other impeachments in the executive, like in terms of the impeachment of Mithika Linturi, which was serious. It was a serious scandal of fake fertilizer. Agriculture is our basket. Our food basket, and that is tampering with the food basket of a country.
It affects national security, actually.
Absolutely, it was a serious scandal, but you never saw the impeachment
carry through.
Yeah, carry through. But now we are here in the question of the impeachment of the deputy president, and the allegations are very, 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 very heavy. But I feel like we need to take time to not focus on the politics, on who has, like what you've just said, on who has said this, who is fighting who, whether it's Murima or whether it's the rest of the country, whatever it is. I think it is such a critical time that it is forcing us to outthink what we are used to doing. So if you're used to start thinking of things in a tribal line, it is forcing you to outthink that tribal lens that you have, and having you to think about it, because 5-10 years from now will be determined based on the decisions and the questions and the discourse that we are having.
Yes.
And like you said, we don't have another country. Hakuna home ingine. We can't ban this country and then go and set up anywhere else. So as this motion goes on, I think at the end of the day is to just ask the audiences, or our audiences, is to pay attention. Pay attention, because this is not the only motion that is so critical in front of Parliament. There are so many other motions, and don't be swayed by online discourse. At the end of the day, it is our future that is at stake, and that is the season of the politics we are in. We are being called to pay attention. I think that brings us to the end of the episode. Tumesema this is just the beginning, so hii episode iko on pause. For sure there will be more to discuss in regards. So thank you so much for watching this long episode on the impeachment of the deputy president. Give us your thoughts. What are your thoughts about his impeachment? Who's cooking? And who do you think?
Who's serving?
Yeah, who's serving this dish?
Who's dining?
Yeah.
Who's clearing the table?
Who sets to benefit from the impeachment? And then from this impeachment, what precedents is it setting in our political culture, in our political climate? And then the last question of it all, we impeach the deputy president, and then what? Would like to hear your thoughts. So follow us on all our social media platforms. We are on X, we are on TikTok, we are on Instagram, and we are on Facebook. You can come to the comment sections, patia comments fupi about the impeachment of the deputy president. We will definitely discuss it in our next episode in regards to the next time we discuss the impeachment. And don't forget to subscribe. So till the next time, kachonjo.